just to repeat the health warning, if you get to 65 and you're relatively unfit, don't go skiing. Otherwise, you'll end up like this. A brief run around who I am. I started life as a journalist on the Financial Times, working in London and New York. I then joined the Beeb, and this was back in the 70s. I was brought up in Liverpool, so I used to talk like that. You can do that now in the BBC, but in those days you couldn't. So I was voice trained by a guy from Czechoslovakia, but he spoke perfect English. That's the BBC for you. And one of the tests that you had to do was to broadcast on Radio 4. And my favourite program that I did there was the shipping forecast. Now, any of you who've been at sea in English coastal waters might well be familiar with sailing by da-da-da-da-da-da, followed by the pips at 5 to 6 GMT, and then followed by a voice not unlike mine, having been trained, which would come out with these wonderful names like Cape Finisterre, Heligoland, Dogger Bank, and my favourite always was German Bite. Never quite worked out what that was. From there, I went on to edit the money programme, then Panorama. I joined Channel 4, ran their business programming, and then a friend of mine said there's more money to be made in PR and crisis management. He lied. I went to work for Price Waterhouse in London and Frankfurt as head of European media relations and also crisis management. Those of you familiar with the auditing profession know they don't have crises. They have what's called a TPM, a troublesome practice matter. Doesn't it sound better? You know? There's no crisis, it's just a TPM. From there, I joined Royal Dutch Shell at the time of Brent Spar in Nigeria, so it was a really good career move to join then. And it was great experience, very steep learning curve. From there, I went into academia, and I directed the master's degree in international public relations and crisis management at Cardiff University. Joined Link about 4 years ago, where I tended to specialize in the oil and gas sector, often going to the Middle East in 40 degrees, which is always might be on a day like today, would be fine. So, sustainable reputation management. Oops. What is reputation? Anybody recognize the painting? Yep. Who is it? Exactly, Magritte. What is reputation? Does it hide behind that apple? A lot of what I'm going to say really concerns the eyes. 75% of information we get goes in through there. Only 25% goes through the ears. When we were at Cardiff, we did an experiment with the students. We ran the CBS News footage of the first presidential debate between Kennedy and Nixon. On the right-hand side, you had the tall, tan senator for Massachusetts North. And on the left-hand side, you had the wizened, creepy figure of Richard Tricky Dicky Nixon. Showed it to the students, and they got them to vote on who won. And the tan senator from Massachusetts North, perfect, did the lot. One of the issues with Nixon was that he had been ill, and he was perspiring profusely. Also, his memory was starting to go. So he had his crib cards with him, and he kept looking down. And on camera, that looks really, really dodgy. One of the reasons he became known as Tricky Dicky. You take the pictures out, and we ran the soundtrack, and Nixon wins. Kennedy loses. Nixon was making more and better reputational points in that speech than Kennedy was, which I know we say the picture's worth 1,000 words. It's probably worth more than that. Okay, reputation is what you say and what others say about you, the accumulated experience and image of the organization. A couple of examples there of companies where in the audited accounts there's a figure. The brand value figure is higher. That's the reputational element in it. So reputation, people think it's a sort of one of those fluffy bunny things. It's nice to have. It actually hits the bottom line. I've got a few examples about where it hit the bottom line going south. Reputation, hard to win. As we found in Shell, it's easy to lose, difficult to regain. The example we've got here is one you might be familiar with, Brent Spar, an oil storage platform which was redundant. And the correct engineering decision was to sink it in the deep water off the Dutch coast. This was a trench where the German fleet had been scuttled after World War II. So there's a lot of company for the spa down there. And as I said, it was the right engineering decision. But there are many more stakeholders than the engineers. And a number of key stakeholders hadn't been consulted. One of them was the Dutch government. And given that 60% of Royal Dutch Shell, hence the name, is owned in Holland, and 5% is owned by the royal family, they got very cross because they hadn't been consulted. Also at the time, Greenpeace was just about starting up and getting very adroit at what they were doing. And what they did, you might remember, they put a crew on the top of the spa with a satellite dish and beamed pictures all around the world. And at the time, there were some elements in Shell who wanted to get one of those ocean-going tugs from the Europort and hose them off. This is 20 stories high. And they had a live video camera. Not very clever. In the event, wisdom prevailed, and the tug never actually hosed them off. But those pictures went round the world very, very quickly via CNN, of which more later. It led to drive-by shootings from anywhere from Hamburg through to Houston, Sydney, Australia. People going by taking a pot at the Shell. And luckily, nobody was hurt. But in one weekend, market share went down by about 12%. Reputation damage is a cost. And again, I say to you, when people ask me, well, it's just, it's fluffy bunny, isn't it? Does it really matter? Well, it matters if you look at the bottom line. You talk to any accountant who works for a company where there is this notional license to operate, which we have in the oil and gas industry. Now, there's no such thing, but if your reputation suffers, then the regulator will be on your case. And we've got lots of questions from regulators in Holland, Germany, and the United Kingdom about the validity of sinking the spa. Eventually, it now breeds mussels in Tromsø Fjord. It was broken up on shore, which is a fundamentally dangerous thing to do. But that it took Shell probably, on a conservative estimate, about 9 months to get back that market share. The other thing that happened, it wasn't just the bottom line that got hit. Whenever you went on a university milk round to hire people, queues round the block, around the Shell table. Bearing in mind, it takes about 3 years to train an engineer in the Shell case, or the rock doctor, the petroleum geologist, as you no doubt know they're called. People weren't coming up. They weren't applying. And even worse, we were hemorrhaging people who'd taken 3 years to train, and they were leaving because they didn't like the reputation. They didn't like going in the pub and people saying, oh, you work for Shell, don't you? People trying to sink that big thing off the Dutch coast. That's where the cost comes. And it's not just immediate to the bottom line. You lose a 3-year trained engineer. That's actually quite expensive. Some more examples there. Toyota. In 2007, they knew that the accelerators were jamming and that cars were crashing into each other. They didn't do anything about it and kept it quiet. 2009, and this is the point of this story, a group of disgruntled Toyota drivers in California set up a blog site, a Twitter site, in which they complained. This was picked up by the New York Times and then goes viral, it goes worldwide. Toyota had to recall 28 million units. There was a forced public apology in Tokyo from the chairman, and their share price just headed south. Again, reputation. They built their reputation on safety. And yet what happened? Accelerators jammed. They run into each other. Not very clever. Again, that took them a wee while to get back. The one on the top right is a story I was involved in when I was working for the Beeb. It was Union Carbide had a plant at Bhopal in India. And it went pop one day. And the court case is still continuing over the compensation for the people who were killed there. Union Carbide went bust. After that, it was taken over by Dow, and its name no longer exists anywhere. One of the interesting sidebars of the story was that they flew their comms director out from Pittsburgh to Bhopal to be interviewed by us. And so we took him on the hill overlooking the town, and behind him there was a big black cloud. And he said, oh, that's no problem. What's the issue? Big black cloud, many dead. We know what happened here. The BP and David referred to the quote on the beach from Tony Hayward, which was, there were 11 people dead on the rig, and he said, I want my life back. Not the thing to say in the circumstances. Again, reputation suffers. The other thing that has intrigued, as in Link, having looked at the story, is that there are a number of things about it which BP could have jumped upon had they thought of doing it. One was Obama calling it British Petroleum. Well, it hasn't been British Petroleum for years. In fact, most of the stock is held in the United States, so it's actually American petroleum. But that was just let go. So you see, again, they took a big hit. Luckily, they've had the resources to get the money in. I think it was 6 or 7 billion US was paid out in the first round of compensation, and there's another 23 billion which has been put aside. So you see, it is actually costly. How does the news get there so quickly? This is a US Airways flight. It was just taken off from LaGuardia and was still under air traffic control there. There was a bird strike. Both engines went down. So the pilot had 3 decisions. He could turn back to LaGuardia, which he reckoned was too far. There was an American military base on the north of Manhattan Island. He reckoned that was too far. Third option was ditch in the Hudson, which he duly did. This, at this stage, it had gone below the radar, so ATC in LaGuardia didn't know where it was. Man on the Staten Island ferry, tourist, ferry sails by, he takes that picture. In 2 minutes, via Twitter and CNN, it was worldwide. More importantly, in the short term, the people in air traffic control in LaGuardia were watching CNN, and they saw the picture. And funnily enough, they said, it's in the Hudson, because there's Manhattan Island. That's how quick it is. And it's the global mobile phone is one of the greatest threats and greatest opportunities that now face corporations today. He started it all, once known as Mr. Jane Fonda, which didn't please him. Ted Turner, founder of cable news network CNN, the first of the 24/7 global rolling news programs. Now, in America alone, there are over 60 news programs. We don't have quite that many here, but we're getting that way. His sort of great time of fame was in Tiananmen Square. Do you remember the picture of the guy with his hand in front of the tank gun? That was a CNN picture. He was there with a crew from Atlanta to film the arrival of Gorbachev, who was visiting the Politburo. They had 3 days on their permit. First day, they set up the outside broadcast. Second day, they filmed Gorbachev arriving. Third day, they decamp and go back to Georgia. All day 1 and day 2 went fine. Day 3, that's when the riot started in Tiananmen Square. And because he had this permit from the federal police, from the Republican Guard, the local police wouldn't do anything. And it took about 4 hours before they whistled up the Republican Guard to go and move them, by which time he'd got that amazing picture. And also being a classic journo, he kept filming while they were trying to move him on, so very good material. But he really was the forefather of this 24/7 global news, and that's where your reputation can be most at risk. Because somebody with a mobile phone camera, as we've seen with the US Airways plane, can put that up into the bird, it only has to be 20 miles away, and that can go viral, can go worldwide very, very quickly, and it might not always be to your advantage. Pictures you probably recognize. News media are instantaneous, intensive and incessant, and have a huge impact on crisis management and business recovery. And by news media there, we also include blogs, Twitter, all of those things, because they're now part of the media. We did some research at Cardiff and asked journalists what was the main source of their information. Blog sites. I mean, pity the poor darlings. Now they, not like in my day, they've got there's so many outlets and fewer of them. If you look, the Telegraph is a classic example in the UK. A journalist who is reporting for that has a number of masters. When he comes back with the story, or she comes back with the story, first of all, they have to upload a story onto the radio and TV network of the paper. It is a very good one, but that's quite time-consuming. Then they have to feed the website, and only then do they get to write the story for the next day. So there's a huge appetite there, and not enough people to feed it. What is SRM? A few definitions here. It's proactive and reactive communications. We had a saying in Shell that you've heard about Murphy's Law. If it can go wrong, it will go wrong. We came up with O'Shaughnessy's Law, which said that Murphy was too optimistic. And you must assume that what can go wrong will go wrong. And it did do on a lot of occasions. And you've heard earlier that it's okay, you try to fix it when it's broke, but try to get to the position where it doesn't get broke or broken. It has to be resilient in terms of people, processes, and technology. The people who work for you, the best and worst ambassadors, and as they go out the gate at night, their vox pop by sky, what will they say about you? And one of the things we did discover in Shell was that, because mobile camera equipment was getting smaller and smaller, Sky reckoned they could be anywhere in London on the back of a motorbike in about 25 minutes and beam stuff live back to the studio. So you do need to make sure that the people who are with you, working for you, your stakeholders, they know what your story is. And we reckon in crisis communications, you've got about 30 minutes after an incident to own the story. After that, it gets filled by speculation. Some of it might well be wrong. But if you can get something out within 30 minutes, and people say, that's impossible. Well, it's not. You get something which is already templated. You get something which exists. It's been lawyered, and all you put in is what, when, and where. You probably won't put in who and why. Who you might not want to say, and why you probably don't know. But at least get something out. And in terms of what you say, we've come up with an acronym called RIP. And this was generated by a guy now, Sir Michael. He was then Michael Bishop, who was boss of British Midland. And they had a catastrophic plane crash some years ago on the M1. Just taken off to go to Belfast, suffered catastrophic engine failure, tried to turn around, didn't make it, and crashed on the M1, hitting a coach and a number of cars. Death toll was over 60. He got in his car and drove up. It was at Kegworth, Castle Donington, East Midlands Airport. He knew very little about what had gone on, other than one of his planes was down, there were fatalities. And he took an interview in the car, BBC Radio, and he said these have become a benchmark. Certainly that's what we taught the students in Cardiff. He regretted what had happened. He promised to investigate what had taken place, and he would publish the findings, RIP. When the markets reopened the following week, British Midland share prices went up. There was somebody on the case. Somebody was bothered. The other good exponent of sustainable reputation management is Richard Branson. I've done some work with him. He's dyslexic, so you can't give him a big brief. He just wants to be talked through it, which is why it's quite good on camera. And a couple of years ago, one of his trains rolled off the track at Greyrig in Cumbria. Turned out to be a faulty rail, or the points were faulty. He got it into his own helicopter. He was on holiday, flew right up to the site, and then did the biz. And he did roughly what Michael Bishop had done. And his line was, people don't know you care till you show you care. The following day, you still couldn't get a seat on a Virgin train. They were all full. Because the reputation, as far as he was concerned, meant he had to show he was bothered. Simple, but actually very crucial. Effectively manage issues, business impact, stakeholder expectations, ensures the long-term stewardship of an organization. This is particularly true if you're an international company and you want to be there for the long term. What you don't want are internecine threats to your reputation. You want to deal with them. And as I've demonstrated in the Shell case, it's not just a feel-good factor, it actually helps the profit and loss. We've come up in link with this model, which we call reputation on the line. Left-hand side, there's business as usual, nothing's happening. Don't you believe it, something will happen. There's an alert. Now this is where blog site monitoring is quite key. It's about data collection, what's going on. We've done work with quite a few companies who now have set up divisions within them to purely monitor what's going on, what's people saying, what's the buzz, what's the conversation. So you're forewarned, pre-armed, and you're proactive, particularly if it's on a blog. See, you do wonder why Toyota didn't spot this thing. It was left to the New York Times to spot this blog site was up and running. But there have been many cases since where companies have been caught out by blog sites, which they could have been answered, they could have been stood down. But if you don't know, you can't do it. From there, you move into action. Sometimes this has to be quite critical. It has to be a crisis press conference, for example. When Shell was getting hammered in Nigeria for alleged abuse of local people and also oil spillage, we organised a visit by 5 different visits of journalists from the West to go to the Delta, to Lagos and Port Harcourt. And we gave them a Shell helicopter and left them to it and said, off you go. And bearing in mind, we had taken a hammering for the month, 6 weeks before that. And they had to have an armed guard, because that's, the Nigerian government insisted on that. But they came back with the most amazing stories. And the best one that we had framed, or had framed in my office, was from the Times, the industrial editor. And he quoted Mark Twain, reports of my death are exaggerated. He says, reports of Shell's pollution in the Delta, they're exaggerated. He said, what we found was sabotage. And the idea that Shell isn't paying compensation, again, is not true. So that's the action we took. And often, that stopped something which was pretty bad, getting even worse. But often companies, they wait until it has got really bad, and then they do something about it. And frankly, by then, you're getting back to the other slide, which says that reputation, hard to win, easy to lose, very difficult to get back again. And then crisis avoidance. We call it the tipping point, that you get to a time and a place where it's quite possible that O'Shaughnessy laws will prove to be right. But if you do all the other things, if you monitor, if you act, then you very probably will not get into that difficulty. Information flow is not through limited nodes and single points of contact that can be controlled. This is called the democratization of media, and that sounds very good. We all sign up to democracy, don't we? So it is a good thing. However, what it means is that everybody can be a journalist these days, and I had to go through a lot of training. Nowadays, if you've got a mobile phone camera, you're a citizen journalist. One story which appeals to me is that, or not appeals, but it underlines the point. You remember in 1997, the June bombings in London. Train, buses, whatever. The Met, for sensible reasons, kept people away from the area where the bombs had gone off for about 90 minutes. So nobody could get there from the normal media, but there were a lot of people wandering around with mobile phone cameras, all taking their pictures. And if you look at a map of where the bombings went off, it describes a crescent moon. So automatically the story was it was a jihadist attack. We knew subsequently that the bombers went off prematurely. But that story ran even on the BBC for quite a while, because the citizen journalists were on site, and there was nobody else there who could get in and say, that's not the way it happened. Facebook didn't quite work, did it? Not that I bought any shares, of course. Don't have enough money. A couple of interesting stats about Facebook. If it was a country, it would be the 4th largest in the world. Something like 900 million people are engaged with it. It is huge, very powerful, and unregulated. That's not strictly speaking true. In China, there are, and I see in Pakistan yesterday, there are regulations to cut down what it does. Interesting, if you're in China and you Google Tiananmen Square, there's this lovely picture of flower beds and trees, and birds singing, not a man with his hand in front of a tank. So that's a real issue. This is now global, as you're well aware. Now, I would say this, wouldn't I? To misquote Andy Rice Davis all those years ago. Placing communications expertise at the heart of business recovery is an essential ingredient. It's not an add-on. It's not, wouldn't this be nice if? It's one of those things that you don't want the phone to go to find out something's gone down and you don't have a plan. You don't have any expertise. It doesn't have to be in-house. You can always phone Link Associates. But you do need to have it. You do need to have something which is part of the business. I would stress it. It's one of these things, it's very easy to say, yeah, if only. Well, if only is not good enough, particularly when things go badly wrong, as we've seen. There was a wonderful occasion a couple of years back. British Airways, I've done some work for, they've got a contingency plan against a plane crashing, which is fair enough. And they had a plane go down at Heathrow a couple of years ago. It didn't quite make the runway, went down on the perimeter road, on the grass, not actually on the road itself. Number of good things to the story. The second officer brought it in. His name was Coward. So the next day you had these wonderful headlines, Coward is a hero. But what BA did cleverly was they organised a press conference at Harmondsworth, which is their off Heathrow base. And the press conference took place within about 2.5, 3 hours of what happened. This was very well drilled, very well organised. They run these exercises every 28 days. The crew come in, standing ovation from their colleagues. These pictures are beamed all the way around the world. Great for BA's reputation. Willie Walsh, who was then chairman, hands over in the press conference to his technical director, who says there are 5 reasons why this plane went down. One of them was the fuel line froze, which we now know was the case. But this went to every BA office around the world. And the next day, they got a phone call from Sydney. A woman in the check-in desk there at the airport said, thank you for that. We had a queue of people saying, what happened to your plane? They said, oh, well, there are 5 reasons why. You reassure, you're on the case. But that's because it was rehearsed. And they lifted that idea from British Midland, from Michael Bishop, who also rehearsed regularly. We didn't rehearse that regularly in Shell. In fact, when we did, we rehearsed for a tanker sinking at sea. And in the 8-9 years I was there, only one tanker went down. But it was quite a spectacular one. It was a chemical tanker coming from Singapore to the Europort. And it hit rocks off Alderney and started leaking cargo and going slowly down. We weren't quite sure what the cargo was at that stage because the bill of lading has been misplaced, which was unfortunate. But this happened on the day when we were doing an exercise about a tanker crashing. So Shell Transport, Shell UK, rang Shell International and said, by the way, and we said, you have to precede this with exercise, exercise, exercise. And the guy said, no, it's sinking. So I said, oh, fine. Yes. So we changed tack. Going back to Ted Turner, they had a crew in Cherbourg, which is the nearest French port, and they put up a helicopter with a satellite-enabled camera in it. And it took the Evoli Sun about 3 or 4 days to settle and go down. And each night the news was led, particularly in the south of England and Channel Islands, by this big Shell Pecton slowly sinking. And unfortunately at the time, Shell Chemicals they started painting slogans on the front, and the slogan on this one was "Safety First." So it's really good pictures. And then just one other sidebar to the story: the French Coast Guard, who run by a guy called Michael Angel, who had no sense of humour. They put down a drone so we could see what was happening, and they beamed the pictures back to Shell Tower. And I was sitting in the basement because we had built a TV studio there with the boss. And you see plainly there's gas oil coming out the back and product coming out the front. So he said to Michel Ange, what does it look like? And are you familiar with Inspector Clouseau? He said, it looks like an ecological town burn. And we creased ourselves. And at the other end, he said, do you find this funny? Yes. I had the fortune of meeting him once, and he really didn't like Clouseau at all. He didn't find him funny. Blogs, even our friends at ExxonMobil have been known to do it. This is back in 2010. First time it joined the world of corporate blogging. Just going back to the Exxon Valdez, it took them a week to make a statement about that. And when they did, the then managing director said, it doesn't matter, it's only a lot of oiled seabirds. Not clever. It took them a wee while to get out of that one. To achieve a sustainable system, the roots of communication need to be derived from the building blocks and immersed in the DNA of the company. In other words, this is just to reiterate, it's not a bolt-on. It's something that has to grow from the company's culture. And it's no tales out of school, but Shell, in its 100-year history, made a habit of not talking to people outside. And when I first joined, I made the effort of ringing around the 15 energy editors who covered the sector. And the guy from the FT thought it was a hoax, because Shell had never talked to them. Yes. When it goes wrong, when it's not in the DNA, and we know we had an even more recent example that fill up your tanks. Oh, and by the way, what about a jerry can for the garage, which I think is illegal in England or in most of Europe. It's not actually looking into, is it part of the DNA? And the government admitted afterwards that they got that wrong, that they just piled it on. They just said, what do we do about this? Oh, we'll tell people to go and fill up their tanks. So you saw the queues around petrol stations everywhere. If you are going to make a statement, make sure it grows out of your DNA. Any questions? Oh, thank you. More.
Yeah. Part question, part observation.
I'll deny it.
Will you be targeting News International as an organisation that you might want to work with? And how does a press organisation get its press so badly wrong as they did?
Interesting question. They've just hired yesterday a man called Guto Hari, who was a former BBC political correspondent. And he replaces Andy Coulson, who, as we know, went to Cameron and then he's gone too. And it is quite bizarre that a newspaper can get it so wrong, that you've got people there who are experienced allegedly in political reporting, know how the media work, and yet you had this crazy situation where they were going before the Levinson inquiry and basically contradicting each other. And it is quite, again, it's not in the DNA of the organisation. It can't have been, because otherwise you wouldn't have made that crass gesture. But I say, interestingly enough, yesterday, it was announced that Guto Hari is joining as head of communications for News International. And the words stable door and horse spring to mind. Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay, Mike, over please.
Mike, when you began, I had an impression, which I frankly didn't approve, that this was about how to give an image of your company that may actually not be the right one. What I was left with, however, was a much more positive impression that actually there's no camouflage or disguising a lack of integrity, a lack of reliability, and a lack of decency in your corporate social organisation.
People spot that more and more because of social media.
And I think that's a very sort of positive after effect.
Yeah. I mean, we're very keen on transparency at the corporate level. And there are two rules in public relations. Rule 1 is don't lie. And Rule 2 is remember Rule 1. Because if you do lie, then you will get found out and you won't be trusted for a long time. And you've seen that happen so many times. Union Carbide. Just one other brief example. I did a story about the Townsend Torrison ferry that turned over, Herald of Free Enterprise at Zeebrugge. And we were filming at Zeebrugge and it was lying on its side in the channel. And the bow doors were open and cars were moving out. And again, the communications director was being interviewed and she said, oh no, it's nothing to do with the bow doors. Really? Is that my car? Yeah, transparency.
Yeah. Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, thank you, Mike. And do you want to take a seat for...